The world's biggest oil producer, Saudi Aramco, is no longer the world's most profitable company after net income plunged by almost half last year due to the pandemic. But the oil giant says it still plans to dole out tens of billions of dollars in dividends despite the plunge in profits. Most of this money will go to the Saudi government, which is the company's largest shareholder. And Aramco says global demand for oil is rising, so it expects earnings to get a boost this year.
This was one of the most challenging years in history. We are seeing a pickup in demand in Asia and also positive signs elsewhere.
Well, for more on this, Ellen Wald joins us now from Jacksonville, Florida. She's the president of Tranversal Consulting and author of the book Saudi Inc. Great to have you back with us, Ellen. Now, a $40 billion profit is still quite an impressive result in anyone's book, certainly one of the largest results for any public company globally, but it does represent an almost halving of its earnings. Was this purely about the pandemic and the perfect storm of that drying up of demand that we saw last year, coupled with the plunge in oil prices?
Exactly. And it really did have to do with the plunge in oil prices. You have to remember, though, that part of that plunge in oil prices was created by Saudi Arabia when it decided that it was going to produce up to its maximum of 12.1 million barrels a day. So Aramco produced quite a lot of oil, and people did buy quite a bit of oil. The problem was that a lot of it went into storage, and that helped keep prices low in addition to the overproduction. So by the time we hit June, the producers were definitely scaling back in a big way in terms of production, but prices really didn't start to pick up until almost the end of 2020. And so that's really reflected in the financial statements of 2020. Interestingly, though, Aramco did much better than most other oil companies. If you look at Chevron, at Exxon, at BP, all of them had losses in 2020. I think perhaps Rosneft might be the only comparable company that posted a very small gain.
Now, Saudi Aramco thinks it'll return to pre-pandemic levels by the end of 2021. But as we know, global industries are still struggling to get back to normal. Huge consumers of oil, such as airlines, for example, are really struggling to get back in the air, or certainly back to pre-pandemic levels. Do you share Aramco's optimism in terms of its outlook for the year?
Well, it's interesting because I've also heard that Aramco doesn't see us returning to pre-pandemic levels of consumption until sometime in 2022. So I think that they're probably a bit more flexible in their forecasts than perhaps was indicated on the earnings call today. And yes, I think air travel is a huge issue. If you look just at some of the stats in the United States, jet fuel demand is down 30% just in February, and that's really all across the world. I'd also say that cruise ships are another source of issues for demand because they generally consume a lot of fuel oil, and we're not seeing that industry get back either. And that's going to continue to weigh particularly on big oil producers. Now, plastics is an industry, is an area where more oil is being used for, but I'm not sure that can quite compensate for the decline in jet fuel. Now, Aramco's really focused on Asia, and we've seen demand in Asia, particularly China, really picking up. So that may be the source of a lot of Aramco's optimism in particular.
What about Aramco's commitment to stick to its plan to pay out $75 billion in dividends this year, despite the profit plunge? I guess it's hard for Aramco to cancel the payout, given that the Saudi government is its biggest shareholder. But will the company have to go deeper into debt in order to finance this?
Well, they did take on debt to finance the payoff. I mean, their net profit was not enough to cover that. And let's also remember that they paid $110 billion to the Saudi government in 2020 as well. So Aramco is not in any way able to cover its these kinds of expenses just with its profit alone, and they have looked to the debt market to handle that. But I don't see this as a problem considering what we're looking at for 2021. Oil prices have really climbed. Most people don't foresee oil prices plunging again the way they did in 2020 with demand picking up. It looks like Aramco is probably going to do fine in 2021, and that leaves 2020 as kind of a blip in terms of profit for them.
And in a surprise move, the Saudi government on Monday proposed a ceasefire with Houthi rebels in Yemen. We know those fighters have been really ramping up the attacks on Saudi Arabia's oil facilities, the latest one happening just on Friday. What damage have these attacks done on its oil facilities?
So the latest attacks really haven't done all that much damage. They've been basically entirely superficial, brief fires that were put out, no damage to equipment, no disruption of the refinery in Riyadh or the loadings at Ras Tanura. So they really haven't had much of an impact on the market other than brief price spikes before people realized there wasn't a lot of damage. Now, of note, though, is that the refinery, the Aramco refinery in Jazan, which is supposed to come online quite soon, has been a very frequent target of Houthi attacks. And that's really part of Aramco's push into downstream. So a ceasefire with the Houthis in Yemen is a good sign, I think, for Aramco, particularly in light of a lot of the emphasis they're placing on that particular refinery.
Okay, Ellen Wald, we'll have to leave it there, but it's a pleasure as always to get your analysis. Thank you.